The wine smelled like cherries and cheap applause. Meredith's diamond bracelet clinked against her glass as she stood. Everyone quieted. She smiled at me, then said, "To my son. May he find someone who truly loves him someday, not his wallet." And Grayson laughed. My chest went still. The roast on my plate had turned cold. So had I. Where in the world are you listening from? Would you have spoken up or swallowed the shame? Tap subscribe if you're ready for the whole story. My name is Camila Torres. I'm 31. I teach 10th grade English in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was raised by a single mom who cleaned houses to keep us afloat. She worked 3 jobs, spoke 2 languages, and never once let anyone call her less than. I didn't grow up with chandeliers or trust funds, but I grew up with books, beans simmering on the stove, and the kind of pride that doesn't need polishing. Grayson Maddox grew up in a different world, summered in Maine, boarded in Vermont. A private law degree, a vintage Porsche from his grandfather, and a family name that opened every door before he ever had to knock. And yet he walked into that library event 3 years ago in jeans and worn-out shoes, smiling like he had nothing to prove. He was giving free legal advice to small business owners. I was helping a student's mom translate her lease. We reached for the same stapler. He offered it to me with a nod. We ended up talking for an hour after the event. I didn't expect him to ask for my number, but he did, and I gave it because something about him felt soft around the edges and unassuming. We dated quietly for 6 months before I met his family, before I stepped into the marble-tiled world of Meredith Maddox. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice sounded like mint tea and old photographs. Elegant, brittle, perfectly posed. From the very first lunch, I could feel it, that subtle distance, that click of judgment behind her eyes. "I love how passionate you are about education," she once said, as if she were complimenting a toddler's drawing. Another time, "So you're Puerto Rican? That must be a lovely place to visit." Grayson always brushed it off. "She just doesn't know better," he'd say. Or "She means well in her way." And like a fool in love, I believed that was enough. I told myself she'd warm up. I could bridge the gap. Love could bridge anything. But love alone doesn't repaint a wall already cracked. And with each family dinner, each charity gala, each afternoon brunch with women named things like Annabelle and Daphne, I felt the hairline fracture deepen. Still, I smiled. I dressed the part. I memorized wine pairings, pretended to understand polo, and tucked my culture into smaller, quieter corners. Until that night, the engagement dinner at Ravenwood Estate was everything she wanted it to be. Linen napkins folded into lotus flowers, a jazz trio playing soft and smug saffron risotto plated like art, and 80 guests, all perfectly aware of who was marrying into what. I sat beside Grayson, hand in hand, breathing in the soft notes of bergamot from the floral centerpieces, wondering if I'd finally be seen, fully seen, by the people who looked at me like I'd won some unearned lottery. Then Meredith stood up, raised her glass. Her diamonds caught the chandelier light like tiny knives. She smiled at me and said to my son, "May he someday find someone who loves him, not his bank account." And Grayson laughed. Just one sound, one sharp, nervous chuckle, but it was enough. It sliced through the room like broken crystal. And in that silence, I realized something bone deep. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about Meredith. It was about the man sitting next to me, and the part of him that would always find her easier to agree with than me worth defending. I looked down at my untouched plate. The duck was cold, so was my heart. And in that moment, I stopped trying to belong. I started planning how to remind them I didn't have to. The first time it happened, we were picking flowers. Or rather, I was picking them for a small bouquet I planned to bring to Grayson's mother on her birthday. I thought maybe a little gesture, a personal touch, could soften her. I was cutting marigolds and eucalyptus from the community garden when Grayson arrived in his polished navy blazer and cufflinks. He looked slightly out of place next to the dirt on my gloves. Still, he smiled, leaned in, and kissed my temple. But when I told him I'd made a bouquet for his mother, his smile faded just a flicker. "She's more of a roses and orchids kind of person," he said carefully. Then added, "She might not know what marigolds are." I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it stayed with me, as if he was warning me not to bring too much of myself in. We brought the flowers anyway. She opened the door, thanked me politely, and placed them near the window behind a curtain. She didn't mention them once the entire evening. That same night, we sat across from her in the drawing room. She asked Grayson how work was going. He spoke proudly of a case he'd just won, then turned to me and said, "Camilla's been doing this poetry unit with her class. It's really cool." I smiled, but before I could speak, Meredith interrupted. "How lovely. I do think creative hobbies are so important for young people. She sipped her tea. Grayson said nothing. He just looked down, stirring the lemon slice in his glass. That silence, it was louder than anything. I started to notice the pattern. Each time Meredith made a passive remark about my shoes, my students, my quaint little car, Grayson would chuckle softly. Sometimes he'd squeeze my hand under the table, as if saying, "Just let it go." And for a while I did. I let it go. Because I loved him. Because I believed silence could be love too. Because I thought maybe when we're married things will shift. But things don't shift just because you wish them to. They crack. And if you don't look closely enough, you miss the moment the break begins. It was a Thursday night. Grayson had texted me earlier. Mom invited me to a quick dinner. Just her and me. You'd be bored. I said okay. I trusted him. I stayed home grading essays about Maya Angelou, half watching a baking show, half wondering if his mom ever ate anything with frosting. At 10:47 p.m., I opened Instagram. A friend of mine, Julia, had posted a story. She worked events at one of the private clubs uptown. Her caption read, "Kendrick Maddox dinner in full swing. Old money moves loud." In the photo, Meredith sat glowing under a crystal chandelier. Grayson beside her, surrounded by 5 other people I didn't recognize, including 2 women in silk cocktail dresses and a man I knew worked in venture capital. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I didn't call him, didn't text, I just waited. At midnight, he walked in, hair still neat, cologne still sharp, smile still casual. "Hey," he said as if everything was normal, as if he hadn't just lied to me for no reason at all. "How was dinner?" I asked. "Nice," he said, setting down his keys. "Just me and Mom like I told you." I watched him, waited. Nothing. "You sure?" I asked. "Because Julia posted a story. Looked like more than just the 2 of you." He blinked. "Oh, that. Yeah. I didn't know others would be there. Mom sort of sprung it on me." He walked to the fridge, poured water, drank like it would rinse the lie from his mouth. "It was just work stuff," he added. "She likes to show me off sometimes." "Why lie about it?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "I didn't want you to feel out of place." There it was, the truth behind the lie. Not to protect me, but to keep me tucked away. Like I was the quiet part of his life. The non-silk dress part. The part he loved in private but wouldn't risk in front of his world. I nodded, went back to grading. And that night, for the first time, I circled a sentence in red ink harder than I meant to. Because I'd realized something lies don't have to be loud. Sometimes they whisper through the spaces where you should have been included. It started with a paper jam. Grayson's printer at home wouldn't stop blinking, so I offered to help. He was in the shower, and I figured it'd take 2 minutes. I tapped the keyboard, reset the connection, and that's when I saw it. His Gmail was still open, 1 tab half minimized. An email thread titled Engagement Weekend, Final Guest List, and Seating. I shouldn't have clicked, but I did. And if that makes me wrong, then fine. Let me be wrong. The email wasn't from Grayson, it was from Meredith. It had been forwarded to the estate planner with notes about catering floral arrangements and a long paragraph at the bottom that made my hands go cold. Then, let's keep Camila's people at the back garden tables by the musicians. Less visibility, less awkward mingling. No offense, but that kind of aesthetic doesn't blend well with ours. I trust you understand. That kind of aesthetic. I read the sentence again and again. She wasn't talking about clothes. She was talking about my family, my skin, my background. It was so calm, so composed. As if seating us like second-class guests was just logistics. I closed the tab quietly, didn't breathe for a second. When Grayson walked out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulder, I looked at him like I didn't know him anymore. He asked if I wanted to order Thai. I said yes, because I needed time to think, to decide if I'd bring it up, to decide if I could live with this kind of hierarchy baked into my future. That night, I watched him eat pad see ew and talk about closing on a new condo near the plaza. He smiled between bites, totally unaware, and I sat across from him tasting nothing, feeling the weight of an email that reeked of roses and rot. That was the moment I knew this wasn't discomfort. This wasn't awkwardness or old money awkward charm. This was cruelty in cashmere, and Grayson. He was either too blind to see it or too comfortable to care. I started dreaming in silence. No sounds, just eyes watching me in rooms where I didn't belong. Even in sleep, I was still seated at the back garden tables. That Sunday, I found myself staring at the engagement ring on my hand. It fit perfectly, but it felt borrowed, like something I'd have to return eventually. I didn't tell Grayson about the email, not yet. I wanted to believe he didn't know, that maybe he hadn't read it, that maybe if he had, he would have said something, done something, anything. But silence is never neutral. It always has a side. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was warm, measured, intentional. "Camilla, this is Eleanor, Grayson's grandmother." I blinked. She'd always been kind, polite in a way that wasn't performative. Soft eyes, firm handshake. She invited me for tea that same day. No pretense, no Meredith. Her cottage was smaller than I expected. 1,000 quiet details, handwritten labels on spice jars. A dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice on the side table. She poured Earl Grey and looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I've been part of this family for over 60 years. Long enough to know when it's about to ruin someone." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She stirred her tea once, then set the spoon down. "Meredith means well," she said, though her voice faltered. "But she was raised to preserve image, not people." She leaned forward. I stayed, and I gave up parts of myself so small I didn't notice them at first, until one day I couldn't find them at all. Her eyes filled with something ancient. Not pity, recognition. She reached into a velvet pouch and placed something in my palm. A ring, not diamond, not platinum, just a soft blue sapphire set in a thin band of aged gold. "This was mine before I became a Maddox. I want you to have it not as a symbol of marriage, but as a reminder. If you ever feel yourself disappearing, look at this." She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't have to. That night, I slipped the sapphire into my coat pocket. And I started listening. Not to Grayson's promises, but to my own silence. And how loud it had become. I sat alone in my car outside the estate the night before the engagement dinner. The windows fogged from my breath. My dress still hung in the back seat untouched. A pale champagne color chosen by Meredith, of course. Inside my coat pocket, the sapphire ring from Eleanor pressed against my palm. Small, cool, steady. I thought about my mother. How she once said, "People will always try to measure your worth, so make sure you're holding the ruler." I looked at my own reflection in the windshield. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Too quiet, too polite, too edited. I'd been chipping away at myself one brunch at a time until there were only fragments left. And all for what? For a man who smiled when I shrank, who let me shrink. Inside the house, Meredith was likely arranging table cards, labeling people quietly like merchandise. And Grayson. He was probably nodding along, believing good intentions make up for bad behavior. That's when I knew I wouldn't flinch tomorrow. Not when she raised her glass, not when he stayed silent. I wouldn't freeze. I wouldn't swallow the insult like it was champagne. I would show them what a woman looks like when she chooses her own name, her own voice, her own table. That was the moment it stopped being a dinner and started becoming a reckoning. I didn't sleep the night before. Instead, I sat on the floor with a yellow legal pad scribbling lines and crossing them out. Not a speech, not a confrontation. A toast. Because if Meredith wanted to weaponize words in the form of flutes and applause, so could I. At sunrise, I called Nia, my best friend, my roommate, my anchor. I told her everything. The email, the seating plan, the lie about the dinner, the silence, the sapphire. She didn't gasp. She didn't say leave him. She just said, "So what do you want them to remember?" I paused. Then I said that I was never quiet because I was small, only because I was calculating. She exhaled. "Then write the toast. Make it beautiful. Make it ruin them." We laughed and cried, mostly me. By 9 a.m., I had my outfit. Not the pale champagne dress Meredith picked, but a fitted navy sheath with my mother's earrings hoop silver, unapologetic. I printed the email, folded it into my clutch, just in case. I practiced the toast once in front of the mirror, then once more this time, without blinking. At 4 p.m., I arrived at Ravenwood. The estate looked like something from a postcard. Lavender hedges trimmed into geometry. Waiters in black ties, the smell of rosemary and money in the air. Guests floated in silk and satin cheeks, pressed drinks clinked. Someone handed me champagne. I didn't sip. Grayson found me near the pergola. He looked at me like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't been bleeding truth all week long. "You look amazing," he said. I smiled, because he was right. I did. I looked like a woman who wasn't here to belong, but to exit beautifully. When the coordinator asked if I'd like to speak after Meredith's toast, I nodded once. Just once. That was the moment my hand stopped shaking. Because I knew this wouldn't be a scene, it would be a shift. And I'd already written every word they'd never forget. I walked through Ravenwood like I'd never read the email. Like I didn't know my family was seated behind the flower wall 2 tables away from the rest. I stopped to thank the florist, complimented the pianist, let Meredith air kiss my cheek and tell me I clean up so nicely. Every step was precise, every breath measured. I was no longer performing to be accepted. I was performing to finish what I started. "Camilla, you look radiant," someone's aunt whispered. I smiled, sipped water, counted down. Grayson held my hand when the photographer called us over. He beamed. I didn't. I just looked straight into the lens, as if documenting the last photo I'd ever taken that role. Dinner was plated truffle risotto, heirloom carrots, aged duck with blackberry reduction. I didn't taste a thing, but I chewed. I nodded politely. Across the table, I watched Meredith sip her wine. She had no idea. She thought she'd won. Her voice cut through the clinking forks like a practiced violin. If everyone's ready, I'd like to say a few words. Grayson squeezed my hand. He thought this was the highlight. He didn't know he was sitting next to the plot twist. Meredith stood, perfect posture, diamond earrings sharp enough to cut. She raised her glass and began. To Grayson, my heart, my legacy, my only child. And to Camila for bringing us all together. Polite laughter. One cousin snorted into his napkin. She wasn't finished. And may this be the start of a union where love matters most. Even more than legacy or bank accounts. A few guests blinked. I smiled. Grayson chuckled. Nervous, clueless, useless. And just like that, it was my turn. The coordinator nodded at me. I stood. Felt the weight of Eleanor's sapphire in my coat pocket. Felt my pulse slow, not speed up. I reached for my glass, tapped it gently. And in that pause, that split second of total stillness, I stopped being someone's fiancé and became someone's reckoning. I tapped my glass once. The room hushed. Even the jazz trio quieted, violins hanging in the air like a held breath. I stood, lifted my flute, smiled wide, warm, practiced. Thank you, Meredith, I began. Your words were illuminating. A few people chuckled, unsure if they should. I'd like to say a few things too before we all get to dessert. Grayson turned towards me, his face soft, expectant. I want to thank everyone who came tonight. Your presence means a lot. Especially those who flew in from far away, like my cousin Esperanza, who's seated near the back, somewhere behind the ficus tree. Laughter broke out, uneasy, controlled. I paused, let the silence settle again. When I first met Grayson, I thought I was walking into a love story. Two people, equal footing, different backgrounds, but the same heart. He smiled at that, mistook it for romance. And maybe that's what it was at first. I turned my gaze to Meredith. But what do you call love when it only survives in private? When it disappears in rooms like this? She blinked, one beat, then narrowed her eyes. I read something this week, I continued, my voice calm even. A note, an email, actually. It said my family had a certain aesthetic, and that aesthetic would be better kept in the shadows of the celebration. Gasps, a hand to a chest. One woman actually muttered, "Oh my God." I wasn't meant to read it, but I did. And I realized this wasn't a celebration of love. It was a performance of legacy, one I was never cast to survive in. Grayson sat frozen, mouth slightly open. Meredith, to her credit, didn't speak, didn't deny it. Not yet. I pulled a folded paper from my clutch, held it up, didn't open it. This email doesn't deserve to be read aloud. Because what it says isn't shocking. What's shocking is how normal it sounded. I set the paper down beside my wine glass. The crystal stem trembled slightly, but not from my hand. Grayson, I said, turning to him. You laughed when your mother said something cruel in a pretty dress. You laughed, and in doing so, you told this whole room I wasn't worth defending. He opened his mouth. I raised a hand. And that's okay. A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. Because I'm not here to beg, or prove I belong, or marry someone who needs my silence more than my soul. I reached into my coat pocket, took out the sapphire ring Eleanor had given me, held it between two fingers. This is the only ring I'll wear tonight. Because it was given to me by a woman who saw me, really saw me, and told me don't disappear. I placed Grayson's diamond ring on the tablecloth. The sound it made was soft, final. I loved you, I said. Soft, final. Then I turned to Meredith. And I never needed your money, but you clearly needed a woman small enough to manage. I'm not her. She stared back, lips pursed, her wine untouched. I turned back to the room. I hope this evening was everything you wanted. Because for me, it was perfect. And I smiled, the real kind. I stepped back. Silence. Then Eleanor stood up. She clapped once, then again, 3 times, slow, sharp. And then unexpectedly, so did Meredith's sister Judith. Then cousin Malcolm. It wasn't a standing ovation, it was something sharper. Recognition. More hands followed. Esperanza stood. The jazz pianist smiled. Even the bartender clapped once, then stopped, unsure. Grayson didn't move, didn't stand, didn't stop me. And that told me everything I needed to know. I didn't cry, didn't shake. I walked. Out of the dining hall, down the marble steps, past the valet, who opened the door like he'd been waiting for me. The night air bit through the silk of my dress, but I felt warm, free. I drove home in silence, no music, no phone, just the soft sound of my breathing returning to its real rhythm. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind smelled like pine and new beginnings. The next morning, my phone was full. 17 missed calls from Grayson, 3 texts from his best friend, a voicemail from Judith. But the one that mattered was a message from Eleanor. Proud of you. The sapphire suits you more than I ever let it suit me. Meredith never reached out. I imagined she was too busy spinning a new narrative, one where she was blindsided, one where I'd proven her right. Let her. Grayson sent an email that afternoon. He didn't apologize. He explained. He said he was caught off guard, that he thought I would understand the pressure. He ended it with, "My mother didn't mean harm. You just misread her." No, Grayson. I read her perfectly. I just stopped ignoring what I saw. I made eggs that morning, watered my plants, called my mom. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "Tu silencio habló muy fuerte." Your silence spoke loudly. And she was right. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it toasts. It's been 6 months since the dinner. I moved out of the apartment I once shared with Grayson. I didn't keep the ring. Didn't sell it either. I returned it to his office with a post-it that said, "Don't forget what silence costs, son." Now I live in a small adobe-style home near Canyon Road. It smells like lavender and wood smoke. On weekends, I walk barefoot in the kitchen, play Nina Simone, and paint with my hands like I used to in college. I'm teaching again, but only part-time. The rest of my hours are mine. For the first time ever, they belong fully to me. Grayson tried once more a long email about therapy growing up, how much he finally sees. I didn't respond. Because the truth is, when someone only sees you after you've left the room, you were never fully visible to them in the first place. Meredith never spoke to me again, but I heard from Judith, who said the family talked for weeks about what I did. Some were horrified, some impressed. Eleanor sends me a card every month, always signed with a quote. Last one said, "To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance." Oscar Wilde. I wear her sapphire ring on my right hand now, not as a symbol of defiance, but of clarity, of knowing who I am without apology. Sometimes people ask if I miss him, and I do, but not the way he was. I miss the man I thought he could become. And that's okay, because I didn't lose that night. I walked out, whole, and that I've learned is the real kind of wealth. Have you ever had to choose yourself over love? Comment below. I want to hear your story. And if this meant something to you, subscribe for more true stories of women who didn't stay quiet.